All right, welcome back to the best training channel on YouTube. Today, lower body day, same focus on what I did, I think probably 2 or 3 videos ago when we had the back squats and the box jumps. I'm ordering things up a little bit different today because I'm gonna be building up to something heavy on that back squat today. I kinda wanna test it out and see where I'm at. When I'm gonna be building up to something that's heavy, I don't wanna be adding extra volume of repetitions. So I'm moving the box jumps before I do my clean pulls today, using it as kind of like a warm up and a prep for the session. Then we'll go into the clean pulls. Then we'll build up to something heavy on the back squats by themselves rather than doing the squats and the box jumps together. So I'm more concerned about how heavy we're gonna go on that bar today versus trying to do the squats and the jumps paired together. I'm gonna start off, I haven't done a single thing yet. I'm gonna start off today showing you guys how I warm up for this. A lot of people ask questions specifically about like, how do I warm up for box jumps, or how do I warm up for cleans, or how do I warm up for this, that, and the other. When it comes to the weight room, I like to just get into it. I don't need to spend a lot of time doing mobility or activation or all that kind of stuff. Honestly, I think a lot of that is just kind of a waste of time. So whatever it is I'm doing first, I generally start off with just an easier or lighter variation of whatever it is that I'm gonna do. And since today I'm doing the seated box jumps, I'm gonna start off with just some very easy seated box jumps, and we're gonna start building this up until I feel like I'm getting to my working set range, or I feel like I'm warming up enough. And then we'll do 3 to 4 sets total on those jumps before we get into the clean pulls today. So since I'm starting off with the seated box jumps, what I like to do is just get a low box, and then I'm gonna just jump onto this probably 4 to 5 times, and then we'll start increasing the height of the box. As I'm warming up for this, I'm not too concerned about being the most explosive and the most powerful that I need to be right off the bat. I only need to jump 20 centimeters. So I'm just getting repetitions in and putting in enough effort to get on top of this box. And then we'll increase the effort as the box starts getting a little bit higher. But I'm not trying to like explode all the way up and land onto this box right now. Like I said, I haven't done anything yet. This is gonna be the first jumps of the day. So we're gonna start off easy and then slowly build up as we get towards our working sets. And then we'll add a box on top of this. Probably do another 3, 4, 5 reps on this. So another thing I'm doing today is I'm gonna answer some questions from the internet. So I just posted on my Instagram stories that I wanna answer some questions for today's video, because really, I didn't have an idea for today's video. I'm doing the same stuff I did last week. You guys have kind of seen this session already. So I thought in order to get some more value to today's video, I'll try to answer some questions from the internet. So the first one that I got here is, if I can't use a sled for resisted sprints, is a weight vest a good option? Generally, I'm gonna say no on that, because when I'm looking at using a sled, I'm looking at getting horizontal projection. I'm looking at trying to create some sort of resistance that I can pull against. When you have that sled behind you, attached, whether it's to your hips or to your shoulders, you've got to really apply force and be able to project against that resistance. When you put a weight vest on yourself, you're now looking at the forces being more vertical. If anything, it's going to make your projection angle worse, because with added weight to your torso, if you're wearing a weight vest, you're gonna have to not only project out, but that weight vest is probably gonna force you to collapse a little bit. So you can probably start projecting up even more versus trying to project out. So I wouldn't use a weight vest for acceleration. One thing I could use a weight vest for would be doing max velocity. So I've done resisted max velocity. The most that I do on my resisted max velocity work is probably about 10% body weight, because I still want it to be at higher velocities. I don't want the load to be so heavy that it's going to change the cadence or change how I feel the max velocity should be. I still want to feel like I'm springing off the ground and I'm still running fast, but we're just adding a little bit of resistance to that to try to develop max velocity. You could also do that with a weight vest, because in max velocity, you're more upright. So that weight vest might allow you to work on the properties of being able to hit the ground and project off of the ground a little bit more. So there is an instance when you could use a weight vest, but for the most part, sleds are the best option. If you don't have a sled and we're looking at doing acceleration, hill sprints would be option number 2. You can get a partner with a band, whatever it might be, but we want that resistance to be horizontal. I don't want that added resistance to be fighting against vertical forces by adding more load to your upper body. All right, so I think this is gonna be my first working set here. We're gonna do 3 to 5 sets on this. So I'll probably do 1 to 2 sets with 60 centimeters, and then we'll add one more box and we'll do 1 to 2 sets on top of that. Another question here that I got, ISOs before or after a workout. Some say tendons respond best to before only. I have used ISOs prior to workouts. I've used them during workouts in kind of like an isodynamic type setup where you do some sort of isometric followed by some sort of plyometric. And I've done them at the end of a workout where I'm just doing on yielding isometrics or some sort of easier variation. There is a lot of benefit to doing some ISOs prior to a workout, but you got to remember that in the order of things that you're doing within a workout, the most important thing that you want to do should be done first. And then as you start to progress through the session, you have kind of like priority B, priority C going on. So if building up your back squat is the number one thing that you want to do, and you want to do ISOs before that, the ISOs should be more of a warm-up. You shouldn't be spending a whole lot of energy like doing really hard overcoming isometrics or really heavy, long yielding isometrics. Do enough to gain some sort of benefit that's going to help you with whatever your priority is. I have a lot of success using ISOs during my sessions, and you guys can see that on the last videos, probably the last few weeks prior to doing this combine type phase. I did a lot of yielding isometrics into some sort of dynamic, like deep tier plyo or some sort of jump. And then I did a lot of overcoming isometrics into jumps, and that was the bulk of my session. Those are great ways to also utilize isometrics. Right now, today is going to be one of those days where I'm going to do isometrics towards the end of my session because it's not necessarily anything I'm trying to focus on specifically, but there is a benefit of doing isometrics regardless of where you want to place them within your program. So speaking from my personal experience, you can put ISOs anywhere within the program as long as it makes sense that it's not taking away from whatever the priority is. If ISOs are the priority, then just load them up, go heavy on them, treat them like they are the priority. But in terms of like the tendons benefits, I think if they are more beneficial prior or after, that those differences aren't probably significant enough where it matters a whole lot on where you try to place those within your specific program. All right, this is going to be set number 2. All right, 4 boxes. We're going to do 3 reps on this again. I think we'll do 1 more set and then we'll move on to the clean pulls. All right, we're about to move on to the clean pulls today. I want to do another question here before I start my warm-up sets for the clean pulls. So here we got a question. Any tips for training transfer of horizontal to vertical force in the penultimate? And it says here that it is crashing me. Sounds like you lack the ability to either produce force eccentrically or you lack the isometric strength required during that transfer. So when I'm looking at producing force eccentrically is if you're approaching something horizontally, let's say you're going to run up and try to dunk a basketball and you're carrying speed horizontally and you need to be able to stop that horizontal force and produce it to be vertically. The first thing that's going to happen is you need to produce force eccentrically to be able to kind of make that transfer happen. So we're trying to go from this direction to this direction. So there's going to be a moment of deceleration as you create that plant step before you start to take off. At the end of that eccentric, there's going to be a slight pause of isometric before you get into your concentric phase. So if you're crashing and you feel like you're losing all your momentum or all your speed in that horizontal to vertical transition, work on the eccentric phase, work on the isometric strength. Two ways I would do that would be work on eccentrics through some sort of plyometric type movement, so depth drops. You could also do depth jumps with varying takeoffs, so vertical takeoffs, horizontal takeoffs, whatever it might be. Depth drops are a great way to develop eccentric force production because you're dropping from a higher height. You're probably gonna end up hitting the ground with 3, 4, 5 times body weight, and you gotta be able to decelerate that and plant that landing very quickly. Isometric strength with heavy yielding isometrics. Build that up to the point where you're doing sets of like 5 to 10 seconds on very heavy yielding isometrics. Transition into some sort of an overcoming isometric where now we're trying to produce force against an immovable object. Those type of things are gonna help with that transition so you're not feeling like you're getting crashed on so much. The other part of that as well is just continuously practicing that transition, so continuously practicing jumping. You could also do that in the gym by doing variations of approach jumps. So start off with like a 1 foot approach where you're just gonna be working on the last 2 steps before you jump up. Stretch it out to 3 steps, stretch it out to 5 steps, 7 steps into a full approach, whatever it might be. But working on that skill while also working on the qualities to be able to produce force, to be able to decelerate force, whatever it might be. Doing all that simultaneously is a great way that'll help you probably feel like you're not crashing in that transition anymore. And you should be able to get more comfortable with the coordination and the ability to decelerate and pop out of that transition a little bit more. So clean pulls today. We're sticking with the 2 and 2. Probably gonna build up to something heavy on this. I'm gonna keep this at about 3 sets total because I don't want this to be the bulk of my workout today. I just want to get enough to where I get some heavier pulls in today and then still feel like I'm gonna be able to knock out a decent set on my back squats. And the back squats today, I'm gonna be building up to like a heavy set of 3, keeping that pause in the bottom because that's what I've been doing for the last few weeks. So I'm gonna do some warm-up sets here. Probably gonna be around 170 on these today is kind of what I'm thinking. And probably do 2 to 3 sets at max on the clean pulls today. All right, 170 on the bar for the hang pulls today. All right, let's find another question to answer real quick. All right, here's a good question. Do you deload every 4 weeks, regardless of the program you are following, and why? I generally will take a deload every 4 weeks. So I'll have 3 weeks of intensive training, 1 week of a deload, and then I move into my next training block, which has been the format that I've done for the last 6 to 7 years. I've been doing that style. Sometimes that deload is every 6 weeks, depending on what it is that I'm working on. Depends on the amount of fatigue that I'm accumulating. But the reason I like frequent deloads is it allows me to go intense more often. So if you're having longer periods of training, then the amount of times you can go very heavy or very hard on those training sessions is going to be a lot minimal than if you're taking more frequent deloads. So every 3rd week, like this week is week 3 of this block, it allows me to touch heavier loads. It allows me to work really hard because I know next week is gonna be a deload. And then I go into the next training block building up towards that heavy week again. So for me personally, it allows me to maintain intensity, not burn myself out too much, but it also gives me the option kind of increase variables in the training or change things more frequently than if I make out like a 6 to 8 week plan. So I can take my deload, review the last 3 weeks of training that I did. I liked this, I didn't like that, or this would be the progression that I would go based off where numbers were at specifically for X, Y, or Z. So frequent deloads for me are something that I'm always going to do. Plus the fact that I'm older, I'm 39, I turned 40 years old this year. Frequent deloads allow me to kind of mitigate the amount of fatigue that I'm gonna accumulate over the course of a program. So like I said, It allows me to go hard, it allows me to take a week off, and allows me to build back up towards those hard weeks. So deloads for me are always going to be in the program. I think the more frequent the deload, the better, versus the other way around. Because if you get to the point where you have just created so much fatigue and you haven't had a deload for a long time, getting out of that state of fatigue could end up taking 2-3 weeks or even more when you're looking at trying to get back to a baseline level where you feel good to train again. All right, so the focus of today's training is to build up to something kind of heavy on a back squat, because I'm using more of an estimated 1 rep max for all my percentage work. And I want to get something that's going to be a little bit more indicating towards a true like top end number on a back squat. So even though I'm going to be doing like a pause variation today, doing something heavier on this is going to give me a better range on where I think like my top end numbers on the back squat are gonna be. Anything above 160, I'm gonna count as a working set, and I'm only gonna give myself 5 working sets in order to build towards something that's gonna be like a 9 RPE. That way, I'm not gonna be overextending myself and trying to do too much at heavier loads. 160 was the working range that I was at last week. So above 160 is gonna be a progression off of that. And I wanted to do 5 total sets. So we're gonna look at 5 sets from 160 and above, and we'll try to figure out what that number is gonna be towards that top end today. All right, I think we're gonna go 140, and then I'm gonna go 160 and count the 160 as my first set today. So the next question I had, it said, biggest piece of advice for young or novice lifters. What I would generally recommend for young lifters is train for general qualities. Don't worry about training for sport or something very specific. If you're a young athlete, let's say you're 14, 15, 16 years old and you're just starting to get into the weight room, you don't need to try to lift to be a better football player. You don't need to do specific drills and exercises to be a better basketball player in the weight room. Build general qualities. 90% of the time, young athletes who first step into the weight room are going to get better at everything by just getting stronger. So getting stronger squats, getting stronger presses. You're gonna notice you're probably gonna get faster, you're probably gonna jump higher, you're probably gonna feel better, just because you've never stepped foot in the gym before. So just building up those general qualities is going to have a broad effect over everything that you do. For novice lifters, I consider a novice lifter someone who is of an adult age and hasn't spent a lot of time in the gym. So if your weight room experience is less than 2 years, you're probably a novice lifter. Somebody like that, I would recommend to just get onto a program and stick with the program regardless of how you're feeling. Like, learn how to complete a program from start to finish. There's a lot of people who buy programs who go through the first 3, 4, 5 weeks and they feel like it's not doing what they wanted to do, or their expectation of progress is a different view than what progress really is, because it takes a lot of time. So what I would say is stick with a program from start to finish, learn how to complete a program, take things that you liked about the program and maybe that you didn't like about the program, and find a new program that better fits what you're specifically looking for. But for the most part, I would say build general qualities. Don't worry about being specific on anything. Building up those general qualities is probably going to transfer over to everything feeling like it's getting better regardless. And then as you've gained more experience in the weight room, you can start being a little bit more specific about certain qualities that you want to see, whether that be power development, max strength development, hypertrophy, whatever it might be. Then you can start getting more specific. I think a lot of people, especially younger athletes, walk into the gym trying to be very specific right off the bat, and they don't have the general qualities to actually do any of that stuff yet. So that would be my advice for anybody who's generally new to the weight room environment. All right, real quick. I realize as I'm filming this that the lighting in this gym is awful. So if these videos come out extra dark, it's because I am in a literal basement and there's a few lights on this side. There's absolutely no lights on the other side of the gym. There's just basically Christmas lights hanging up to give some sort of extra light in the room. But I do realize that the lighting in this gym is going to be awful. So I really don't want this to turn into a production where I have like a camera and a light hanging up, all this kind of stuff. So you're just going to have to bear with the fact that I only have access to what I have access to. Apologies for the very dark and gloomy videos here down in the basement. But the other thing, I was looking through a bunch of the questions. A lot of people want to know about injuries. I am a person who I've never been injured. Throughout every sport that I've ever played, I've never had any injury that has sidelined me for any amount of time. I've always been able to kind of train through things, to be kind of work around things, but I've never been sidelined because I've been hurt because of this, that, or the other. So for the injury type stuff, people want to know like, how would you train around this injury, or what would you do if you had this? Like, something I always tell people is you're either going to find an excuse or you're going to find a way, right? So you're going to let that excuse be your injury on why you can't train, or you can just use that injury as like, you know what, I'm just going to do this instead. So that's the two mindsets that you got to have when it comes to an injury. You're either going to find a way or you're going to find an excuse. All right, that's set number 2. I think I'm going to start going up by 5s now. So 175 will be the next set that we do. All right, we're gonna throw 180 on the bar. I think I got 2 sets left, so I think we're going 180 and then 185. I think that's gonna be a good heavy set for today's 3 rep pauses. We're gonna go 185. It's gonna be conservative because I feel like 180 moved really well. I don't wanna make a huge jump here at the end, so we'll go 185. Still heavier sets than what we did last week, so the progression is there. And then we'll take a deload, and then we'll move into the next training block. We're probably gonna take that pause away and just start working on moving loads, and then that's gonna start being like, should be able to do some 2 reps at like 210, 220, something like that. Something that's gonna be a little bit heavier than this. So take a few minute break, load up some 5s, and we'll do 1 more set on the back squat. We'll do another question here before we hit this last set. How do you manage volume and intensity to still perform at such a high level? Well, going into what we already spoke about with the deloads, doing those more frequently allows me to keep intensities there, allows me to have times off where I can recover, and that's gonna keep me from overtraining, whether or not you believe in overtraining, but really what it's doing is managing the amount of fatigue that I'm gonna accumulate and be able to continue to train. 2 books I think are valuable when learning about managing volumes, intensities, and fatigue. One is by Chad Wesley Smith, Scientific Principles of Strength Training. The 3 most important principles out of that book are 1, specificity, 2, progressive overload, and 3, fatigue management. All the other principles are valuable. They have a place, but if you just learn about those 3 principles in training, so the principle of specificity is like, what are we actually training for? The principle of progressive overload is we obviously got to make things a little bit harder than they were previously if we want to see some sort of improvement in training. And then the principle of fatigue management is how can we manage all of that within the course of a week, in the course of a macro cycle, a mesocycle, whatever it might be, so that we avoid those burnout periods and we avoid periods of big decline in our training. If you can manage those 3 principles, you could write really good programs, and you don't really need to know a whole lot about programming outside of that. The other book that I would recommend is by, I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Bompa, B-O-M-P-A, and it's a book called Periodization. And whether or not you believe specifically in periodization is irrelevant. The book has a lot of value because it teaches you how to go through progressions. It teaches you how to periodize for strength training, for hypertrophy, what that should look like. There's examples on progressions. There's examples on the load management from week 1 to week 2, whether you're going into a peak, whether you're going into a taper, all of that stuff. If you just think of it on a principle-based mindset, where it's not taking everything that this book is saying and using it word for word exactly the way it's supposed to be, more so if we just go, okay, the principle of this is how we can periodize for a strength block and how we can periodize for a power block and for a speed block. And there's concurrent ways to do those all together. Those 2 books put together are very valuable on being able to write really good programs and being able to manage things like fatigue and being able to continuously perform at what would be a high level to your own comparative self. Those 2 things are very good when it comes to learning about how to manage fatigue, how to be able to perform at a high level pretty continuously without having very significant dips in overall performance. All right, I'm looking through. I don't see too many more questions rolling in right now. So I'm just gonna say I appreciate you guys for watching the videos. Those who have liked and subscribed, dropping comments. If you guys wanna throw comments into this YouTube video down below, I'll try to answer some questions periodically throughout different training videos that I'm gonna be doing. So if you see some value in what you see here, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.